The Utah Jazz were one of the best stories in the NBA this year and the best team in the regular season, but can they win it all? I'm Howard Beck of Sports Illustrated. With me, Chris Mannix and Roed Nadkarni. Chris, you just wrote a phenomenal in-depth piece about the Jazz and this breakthrough season that is up on SI.com. What's going to be different about the Jazz in this playoff run?
Well, I think the fact that the Jazz are even here is a remarkable accomplishment. One thing I set out to do in writing this story was to find out how this team came back together after the end of last season. When March came about and Rudy Gobert tested positive and Donovan Mitchell was clearly upset about it, it did look from the outside looking in like this team might need to be broken up, that the end of a very brief era between Mitchell and Gobert might be upon us. But the way this team came together in the bubble and really healed some of those old wounds, I think played a big role in where they are right now. The fact that there was a bubble experience where they're all locked up, where they spent a lot of time with each other, whether it's by the pool, whether it was at the bar, whether it was doing outside activities, they were able to really reconnect as a team. I think that was important to start this season. The other reason, Howard, I think this team is going to be a factor in the playoffs is surprisingly how the season ended for them. Last year, they were up 3-1 against Denver. They blew that lead and then wound up losing in 7 games. But everyone I talked to on that team said that experience has been a springboard for them, that they finished that experience believing that they could be a true title contender because they didn't have Bojan Bogdanovic for that series, because Mike Conley was forced out early in the series because of the birth of his child, and he wasn't all the way back with that team. So they really felt that despite the fact that they choked away a 3-1 lead, that they were a true competitor. So all those things, I think, really makes the Jazz a team to watch in this postseason.
Yeah, it's funny, Chris, to even think about that series now. They were still ultimately one Mike Conley rimmed out shot away from making it into the second round. That's just how close that series was. It was interesting reading that story. Chris mentions at one point when they first get to the bubble, there is tension in that locker room, right? Like the air still needed to be cleared a little bit. And I think what's most fascinating about the Jazz going from last year to where they are now, obviously everyone remembers what Donovan Mitchell did in the first round of last season with all those crazy scoring performances. But what we saw this season was him willing to not only, continue to do what he does on the court, but cede a little bit of that spotlight to Rudy Gobert. I think what's most remarkable about the Jazz this year is we've seen a true partnership between Mitchell and Gobert. They're both so equally important to the team's success. So not only did they both kind of rebound from what was maybe a tough point in their relationship, they've rebounded in such a way that I think the partnership looks more like a partnership than it ever has before. And both those guys are kind of getting equal amount of the credit, an equal amount of the recognition that I think in the past wasn't always there with the Jazz.
And Howard, if I could just add one thing to that, one of the factors in the Gobert-Mitchell relationship that often gets overlooked is that both those guys were in contract years last year. There was a tension that existed even before the blow-up that caused the end of the NBA season back in March. Both those guys got paid this past offseason. Rudy Gobert got like a $200+ million contract. Donovan Mitchell got a max level extension. So that sort of potential distraction was taken off the table before the season started. And I think that helped this team get to where they are as well.
Yeah, a lot of credit to both of those guys and to that team, that locker room, that coaching staff, hell, the front office too, for all holding it together. And you can see, in the comments in the story that you wrote, Chris, just how much everybody was engaged and focused on that, but not overly concerned. And the team dynamics are really important. But I think what's also really interesting about this postseason run for the Jazz, they still are not constructed the way that we're normally used to seeing championship teams constructed in the NBA. They don't have a LeBron and AD. They don't have 2 of the top 7 or 2 of the top 10 players like some of the other contenders. And it's definitely a really competitive top of the Western Conference. Phoenix has a case to make for itself. Denver, even without Jamal Murray, has a case to make for itself. And so do the 2 LA teams. So the Jazz, they're definitely the winners of the regular season. And kudos to them for pulling it back together and having this phenomenal breakthrough. The question remains, how far can they get in this postseason? And for more on that, and of course, for Chris Mannix's story, check us out at SI.com.